So how do we build out? How do we successfully build ourselves out of a diet? We've pulled off 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 pounds of fat. Now what? What do? We can't stay in fat loss purgatory forever, right?
Never.
Welcome to episode 63 of Coach's Corner with your host, Justin Schollard.
And Ethan Wolf.
And today, folks, we're going to finish up our series on programming. Part one was 2 episodes ago on just general overview on what programming is and how one can benefit from it. And we followed it up with part 2 of specific fat loss programming, what mistakes to avoid. So if you haven't seen that, you might want to go back and give those a listen. And then today we're going to wrap it all up with part 3, which is going to be focused on, okay, so we've accomplished our fat loss goal. We've pulled off 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 pounds of fat. Now what? What do? We can't stay in fat loss purgatory forever, right?
Never.
So how do we build out? How do we successfully build ourselves out of a diet? A, so we can start eating a decent amount of food again and not just be in diet world forever. And B, do it in a way that doesn't just put all the fat that we've spent so many months losing right back on. And personally, I can relate to that. Like, how many times have we gone through a fat loss or gone through a bulk phase? I'm gonna get bulky, bro. And then 4 or 5 months later, you're like, I'm just fat now.
Yeah, it's too
I need to
much.
lean out. And then you just cut your calories and lean out. And then once the dust settles, you literally weigh the exact same as what you did when you started your bulk.
Yeah.
You're just like, that was 10 months of my life.
Yep.
What happened?
All
What was
this
it
effort.
for?
Yeah.
So hopefully you can avoid those mistakes. And, women, I'm sure, probably don't experience it as much as guys do, but I'm sure there's some women out there who can relate as well.
Yeah, I think you never want to find yourself back where you started after a large amount of effort.
I think more often the case is people, they lose a bunch of weight and then they're like, all right, mission accomplished. And they start quote unquote eating normal again. And then within 6 months, they've gained all the weight they've just spent the last 6 months losing.
100%. Well, I mean, the answer is you just go right back to the patterns and habits that you had before you started dieting.
Yeah.
All better.
Yeah. Job's done.
Job's
Great.
done.
Go back
Exactly.
to normal again.
Static situation,
Yeah.
goal accomplished.
Yeah.
Walk away, job well done.
Well, one thing you guys got to understand is that there's no going back. You're never going to go back. That's it. We know what that looks like.
Right.
It looks like the situation that got you into a place where you needed to make a change. Mm-hmm. So if we just, whatever, reverting back to going normal again, well, guess where that's going to land?
Yeah.
Guys, come on.
Back to it.
Yeah. So, okay, so let's dig in here. So let's talk about how one would successfully build themselves back out of fat loss, aka calorie deficit, to more of a maintenance and maybe even beyond. Maybe we want to continue this journey of building phase, fat loss phase, building phase. So that's, maybe over the course of a year or two, we're talking a real composition, which was the thesis in our 2 episodes ago when we were just talking about programming in general.
Absolutely.
Let's start with I'll just give you guys how I did it. And this is all under the context of we are assuming that being lean is the objective. Because if you just want to put on a bunch of size and muscle, just go right up to maintenance for maybe a week and then just jump straight to a 500 calorie surplus and then just go. That might appeal to some people. I've gone through phases where that was appealing. But I think for the most part, people want to keep their body fat levels low while they build up out of.
Well, especially
diet.
if that's what you've done the time to do is get lean.
Yeah. Most people, their objective is to lean out.
Yeah, that's almost always what the case is. I mean, we all want more lean mass, but the benefits of getting rid of the body fat is there.
And it comes to a certain point where by being in a calorie deficit, you actually resensitize your body to be more receptive to training and calories. So when you do start to build out of a calorie deficit, your body's way more efficient at utilizing calories and, putting them to good work to build muscle and everything. If we're always in a surplus and we just get inefficient.
Yep.
You're not assimilating the calories at the same rate that you would have.
There's this stuff to throw away. Your body's like, we're getting plenty.
Yeah, exactly. Right. Okay, so let's just say we are at the depths of our fat loss and we've accomplished the goal. Okay, so now what? So what do we do now? I know how bad we all just want to build up and get out of there and normal amounts of food, the right amount of food for your body. The mistake is just want to jump right back up. And you're going to see a lot of big influencers say, like I think Jeff Nippert is a big fan of just going right up to maintenance. He's probably one of the biggest influencers that exist currently. And, you know, he's a smart guy and I don't think what he's saying is wrong. I just know that like, this is all I do all day, every day. And I've just seen it and myself and with the thousands of clients we've worked with over the years. Like if you do that, it's not going to be as effective and you're going to smooth out. And when I say smooth out, that means that you're going to get a little soft, putting on some body fat.
Fluffy.
Yeah, a little fluffy, a lot faster than if you reverse diet. I know reverse dieting, people, it's controversial. It's a hot topic.
I guess it is, yeah.
People go, it is. Like they...
I mean, it makes sense to me. I don't think it's that, it's pretty straightforward. I just think, I mean...
People just think it's a waste of time.
Right.
They just don't think that it matters if you systematically build your calories back up. They just think, why not just go right up to maintenance? Because anything from a deficit to maintenance is still a deficit anyway. So why not just go straight to maintenance? What's the difference? And I get the logic.
Right.
Just telling you from my experience that you just stay leaner if you reverse diet. And so reverse dieting is essentially just building yourself systematically by increasing calories every week or two in relatively small amounts while monitoring your scale weight and progress photos along the way until you get up to a maintenance and then beyond.
Yeah, I was going to say, that's the big thing. And so idea would be the more slower the incremental addition of calories back from your deficit, the more your body can adjust to the increase in calories, adjust its metabolism, and kind of create a homeostasis around that new calorie amount so that there's not just like a sudden influx of calories compared to what it's used to, and therefore you kind of put on a little body fat along with, you know, maybe some muscle or just in your existence. And so it might be 50 calories a week. That's pretty standard or typical, I think. You know, obviously the lower you go. But this obviously implies you're going to have to be measuring super detailed.
I don't want to measure. I just want to like...
Well, you've already done it.
I just want to like, you know, eat healthy, bro.
And I think it's even up to like, well, I've heard 100 calories a week too.
I think it just depends.
Yeah, it
depends on the person.
How much deficit you're in, how big of a person
like
you
if you're adding calories and you're not seeing any subsequent weight gain, then you could probably make bigger jumps. But it is so interesting to me just like looking at people's like, and we're under the assumption that people are accurate and they're consistent. If you're not accurate or consistent, then that's for step one or else nothing matters.
Yeah.
But it's just so interesting to me when I work with people and they're a good client and I'm seeing them every day measure their food out to the gram, hop on the scale every morning for their dry weight after they pee, before food and water. They're really concise and consistent, and how even just a 50 calorie increase in that sort of fertile ground can generate a result. It's really interesting. You wouldn't think that it would, but it does. And I think it's universally agreed that the slower we lose weight, the less likely we are to lose muscle as we lose fat, right? So
Correct,
like we talked about last week, like if you put yourself in 1,000 calorie a day deficit, like you'll lose weight, but you're going to lose a lot of muscle along with the fat.
Yep.
And I think the opposite side is true as well, where that's the argument that I make around reverse dieting. If the objective is to stay lean, is that the slower we draw out your rebuild up to maintenance and beyond, the less likely you are to lose or to put on body fat. So It's the same, it's the equal opposite in a lot of ways.
Yeah, it's in a certain sense, you're just not introducing larger currents to kind of move the system as a whole so much, you know. And I think what's interesting also about reverse dieting is I think that while it's, you know, creates a nuance and you got to be nitpicky about it and be patient, that over time, I think it has the ability to really raise your ceiling metabolically.
It does.
And allow you to consume way more calories in a long term without putting on substantial amounts of body fat.
100% agree with you.
And so in a certain sense, it's kind of like the hack that would eventually give you way more food freedom, turning you into just let you have more lean mass, even though you're not putting on extra body fat, and therefore just let you eat more things, which eventually might come to a place where you're like, oh, I kind of have the ability to generally eat what I want. Without like putting down a pint of ice cream, which is going to be like 1,200 calories in a sitting, without, you know, exceptions of crazy food dumps. Yeah. That, you know, you could fundamentally have your cake and eat it too, because you have some room for a dessert.
It really is delayed gratification. And like you just hold it back, and then you get to this place where what I joke with my clients and say, it's a promised land. You've arrived, but the journey, you know, it's a rite of passage where for me, for example, when I did it, the depth of my fat loss phase, I think I was eating like 2,200 calories, 2,300 calories, which for me is very low. I mean, like not like dangerously low, but low, you know, I was like very hungry. And then we built up, I think at the end of it, I was at 32 or 3,300, but that was over the course of like literally 6 months.
Yeah.
It was like I was working with my own nutritionist at the time, and it was like every caloric increase was only based off of whether my scale weight had dropped or not.
Right.
So we would introduce a caloric increase. So let's just say 50 or 60 calories, which is oftentimes what it would be, like 15 more grams of carbohydrates.
Yeah, which is so ridiculous.
Which is 60 calories.
I mean, that's like, you got to be within like a 3 gram or less margin at
Yeah.
that point.
And listen, he made it clear to me, he's like, we only get to have this kind of fun because of how consistent and accurate you are. He's like, most people, we're just trying to get them to just like make their own food. He's, you know, and that's the spectrum that every nutritionist has to deal with their clients.
Of course, yes.
But anyway, so like, but whatever, it was an amazing experience for me. So we would go like, let's introduce 60 more calories. And then the next morning I'd hop on the scale. Maybe there would be like a minor fluctuation in weight, like a quarter pound up. So we would just hold. And the idea is he would see my weigh-ins each morning. And then maybe on like day 9, we would see a quarter pound drop.
So not even like staying level, it would have to go back down.
Yeah, it would be, and then we would go another 60. And then to your point, what it's doing is it's just raising my metabolic ceiling.
Yep.
Right? Or floor.
Yeah.
Because now it's like allowing for that adaptation. As small as that stimulus was, it was allowing for the adaptation to set forth in my body, okay, created more sort of like a thermogenic effect from digestion, I guess, or whatever.
Yeah, yeah.
And then we would raise it again. And I'm not kidding you, dude. Like after 6 months, I'm at 3,200 calories, which is a lot of food.
It's a fair amount of food, yeah.
I'm like, but I'm 4 pounds heavier than what I was when my lowest, I was like 180. Then I got up to like 184. It's only 4 pounds, but I was just as lean as I was at 180. And so over the course of like literally a half a year, it was like 3 or 4 pounds of aggregate weight, but it was muscle.
Yeah.
It was just muscle.
Yep.
And I'm eating 3,200 calories a day with just as lean as I was eating 2,300 calories a day. So it takes discipline. It's not for everybody, but that is one way to successfully build. That's like the most, I think, detailed approach. For most folks, I think, like you said, just introducing, if you just went 50 calories a day or a week or 100 calories a week and, you know, over the course of like 4 to 6 weeks until you just got up to maintenance, that's not a bad idea either.
Yeah, I think it's just more realistic in a sense. I mean, that's a very detailed approach. That's working with the coach.
Totally.
That's you being dictatorship, regimentedly strict.
Mm-hmm. COVID, single. What else?
Yeah,
what else?
what else are you gonna
Have
do?
just chicken and broccoli for every meal.
Breakfast, lunch, and
It was
dinner.
awesome.
Yeah, but I think exactly that, right? Because I think the reason that it allows for the caloric ceiling to rise is that as you approach maintenance and you're still training really hard, like you said, now there's this ability for your body to kind of prioritize muscle gain and lean mass. And so our lean mass produces the most caloric requirements out of our whole system. I mean, our brain does a lot. There's things, but fundamentally, the more lean mass you have, the more your metabolic rate goes up.
Yep.
It's the main source of heat. It's just doing all the things. It's like the little engines. And so, you know, you hit maintenance and you're training really hard and you put on a little muscle. Now your metabolic rate goes up. Then you kind of match that incrementally. And you're basically, your body's allowed to, like you said earlier, like at a slower pace, but put on lean mass, which then raises your metabolic demand, which then allows you to match that.
Yep.
And you kind of just do these very small incremental stepping stones.
Yeah, yeah.
And I would assume you probably had some type of fat gain on there, but it would just
Probably. I don't
Right.
think you can, like, unless you're on steroids,
Steroids.
you really
Yeah,
are not
so
gonna.
to clarify that, right? You have catabolic and anabolic states. Catabolic is when you're generally in a deficit related to cortisol. It's when your body, you can think about it as like building and breaking down. So when you're catabolic, you're breaking down, whether through stress or lack of sleep or lack of calories. And then when you're anabolic, you're building, putting on fat, you're gaining lean muscle. And obviously, you know, the ecosystem of our physiology and biology is constant ebbs and flows. You know,
And constantly adapting to our environment.
yeah, it's everything is kind of always an in and out, and so you know, to say that you're constantly anabolic or constantly catabolic, I think there's always a degree of both. Otherwise, we'd wither away to nothing if we were never anabolic, even in.
And there's benefits to cycling between the two. You
Yeah,
know, it's like if
absolutely.
you're
But-
always catabolic, there's benefits to that, but then you also start to lose lean mass and you know, all that stuff.
But the general idea is that you can't bulk or put on lean mass without gaining some type of fat.
Totally, yeah,
Because
because
to be
you're
in an
just
anabolic
you're just in a state of being anabolic.
Which is just building and putting things on. And
Yeah.
generally is associated with a caloric surplus, which is like, you know, what most people do. Like people that want to get super giant will often go crazy anabolic, eat a lot of food, and then cut the fat off afterwards. And that's kind of the bodybuilder way, right? It's like pre-competition, get as big as you can, and then slice off, expecting to lose some muscle, but hoping that where you end up, you'll have more muscle than when
Yeah.
you started. And you're just kind of different ways of playing the game. And so I think, you know, the idea is to just make that state of being anabolic as efficient as possible and kind of directing
Like there's always going to be a
things.
ratio.
There's gonna be
It's
a
just-
ratio,
We
exactly.
can manipulate the ratio
100%.
via training and nutrition.
Yes, exactly.
And
so
the other, just like losing fat, you know, like if we have high protein and we're
Exactly.
resistance training, we can manipulate the ratio of fat loss, or excuse me, of muscle loss.
to lean mass in the catabolic
in
state.
the catabolic state. And then the other side of
Exactly.
that is like we incrementally reverse diet. I believe that we just improve the ratio of body fat accumulation during an anabolic phase.
Exactly. And that's basically, I think, the overview of it, the bird's eye view.
Yeah.
And just the more detailed and the more attention you pay, the more you can affect that ratio,
Mm-hmm.
which will eventually lead to you, by putting on so much more lean mass and not acquiring as much body fat, like Justin was saying, you get to maintain your leanness, and then that metabolic ceiling goes up, the more lean mass you have. And then you kind of are one of those people that like looks jacked, looks crispy, and then gets to eat a lot of food, and kind of like all of the things are
Everyone's like,
happening.
oh, how much
Like, how
do
you
you do
have
all
so
that?
much muscle, and how are you so lean, and
yeah.
then how are you just like eating all the time?
So just a slight little hitching over the course of time. I mean, it takes a long time, you know.
Takes time. But once you're there, I feel like you can then kind of enter into like a maintenance mode in
Yeah.
some type of a moderate surplus, because obviously the more of a surplus in calories you go, the more fat you're going to gain. Again, that ratio starts to change when you enter into that anabolic state, but it's almost like really razor thin slicing your margins to let your body adapt, put on as much lean mass as you can, and then enter into a state of maintenance that allows for the most surplus with the minimal amount of fat gain, which will lead to the most muscle gain, which will help keep your metabolic demand high.
Totally. And your
aesthetics
body's
and
efficiency.
the efficiency and your performance. And so now you can work out harder in the gym. You can do more volume, do more workouts.
Eating a shit ton of food.
Eating a shit ton of food and staying in a state of leanness that is satisfactory.
And then what's crazy is like eventually you hit like an inflection point, like a critical mass where like we
Yeah.
said, there's always a ratio. We just manipulate the ratio depending on our nutrition and our training quality. But eventually we get to the point where even following that system, it's not going to just go forever until you're 400 pounds and lean. Eventually you're going to
exactly.
hit this diminishing return where you're going to go, okay,
I can't really eat too much more.
Yeah, and you've delayed that probably 2 or 3 times longer than the average person could if they just kept flip-flopping with these like 500 or 600 calorie deficits or surpluses. But because you just stretched that process out, you got yourself up to that point where you're really eating a lot of food. But, you know, eventually there is a ratio and you're going to see some body fat accumulation. The beauty of that cycle, though, of that system is that let's say you get up, let's say in my case, you know, so I was at 3,300 calories, put on 5, 6, 7 pounds of just like a lot of muscle, a little bit of fat. Eventually we get to that tipping point where it's like, okay, fat's kind of there too. You just like drop the floor out and drop back down to like 2,500 calories, and your metabolism is just firing on all cylinders,
so high
that your fat loss phases are like 3 weeks, 4 weeks.
Right.
Because you can just go, boom, just drop down like 2,500 calories, burn up a ton of body fat in a very short period of time, and then start that process all over again. And then you just kind of just keep repeating that cycle. The thing is, actually, you never have to go as low as you did the first time. So maybe the first time it took you down to 2,300 in order to get the leanness you needed. But as you kind of build up that cycle again, maybe the second time around it's just like 2,700.
Yeah, 26.
Which is not bad for a fat loss phase. And then you just kind of just keep shortening this little window that you need to operate
it's
in.
Like the window rises.
Yeah,
the
exactly.
The bookends kind of start to adjust.
So that's like, if you're fucking serious and you're disciplined, do that.
Yeah, that is the way.
For most people, though, and I would fall into that bucket at this point in my life, I just can't. My life just doesn't allow for that sort of level of self-discipline like it used to. But now, listen, just hop on the scale every morning, increase your calories every week. If you notice that the scale is kind of going up quickly, just chill for a week or two and just hold there and recommit to accuracy. Because usually it's like unintentional underreporting. So we're done with our diet now. We're rebuilding out of it. Yeah, no, I'm cool. I can have an extra beer, or I can put a little splash of oil in this. Like,
right, or like, I can use a little more mayo in my sandwich.
Yeah,
finally.
you're not measuring like you used to in the fat loss phase. And so that unintentional underreporting can creep in an extra 100 or 2 calories a day that are not accounted for, and you're like, ooh, I'm trying to stay lean, but I've noticed I'm kind of like gaining weight quickly, even though I'm only eating 10% more than I was. Well, really probably eating more like 15 or 20 because you're not as accurate as you were in your fat loss phase. And so that's going to be most people, and that's totally fine. So in that case, it's just a matter of being accurate, weighing yourself every morning, your dry weight, like we said earlier. And then if you do see the scale kind of climbing quickly, just chill on the calorie buildup for a week or two, and then just kind of go back and reinvestigate your days. Am I getting a little sloppy on my tracking here? And that's going to be much more of a realistic path for most folks. So there's
and I think what per to what Justin was saying earlier, it's like you can never go back. Like our bodies is a constantly adapting organism. We are constantly going to be a reflection of our patterns, including our composition and our health. And even if you are an athlete, doesn't mean you couldn't be completely immobile and weak when you're 45, right? Like just because you've attained a certain state at one point in your career of health, fitness, and body fat and all that doesn't mean that it can't change. And so we constantly have to dance and participate with it no matter what. Or at least just get a handle on it in some capacity where we know what we're doing enough to dance and participate with it. We can't not pay attention. And so even if you were to what like Nippard was saying, like just jump to your maintenance.
And his audience is like young male bodybuilders.
Yeah, but even if that's like just the simplest route where you're not going to sit there and incrementally change and do the math to add in 10 grams of carbs here and this, and you just kind of do a lump sum. Even that still implies that you're going to be measuring your food in some capacity.
Yep.
Hitting your numbers, understanding what those numbers are, and still participating in the same way you did, just with a higher food allotment. But I think the big takeaway is that just because the diet phase is over, obviously the more detailed, the more you can maintain all of the hard work you've just done. But I think it is true that you just see people get off of some type of a weight loss situation,
and they just go nuts.
And they completely stop. Right? It truly is a diet versus like maybe a diet phase or a weight loss phase or a calorie restriction phase. It's like this isolated thing that creates results, hopefully. And then they're like, oh, I have succeeded. And so now I can return to my previous behavior of not paying attention at all. And as we said, if that's what got you to the place that you didn't want to be in the first place,
you know where it's going to end up.
And it's this mentality of like the light switch is on, the light switch is off.
Yeah, it's that kind of like all or nothing thinking. And
so just stay away
statistically,
from that.
And that's why statistically 9 out of 10 people regain every single pound that they've lost within 5 years of their diet or their weight loss procedure of some kind. Like most people, including people who have been on Ozempic, including people who have had gastric bypass or even just dieted the old-fashioned way. The reality is that the mindset that it takes to maintain it is the most important thing, because it's like this, okay, job is done, time to go back to normal now. It's like, oh, no. There's no normal. This is your normal now. There's no going back.
Yeah. I mean, it's crazy. Even for a surgery like gastric bypass, where they're turning their stomach into the size of an egg, and
people figure it out.
You can't eat more than 3 bites. You might be lean, or you might be less weight than when you started. Like you might have lost 100 pounds due to gastric bypass, but then you'll gain 30 of it back, and then you're stuck. And like those 70. If you're morbidly obese and you have 350 pounds to lose, and you lose 100 through gastric bypass, and you gain 30 back, those 70 net loss is still better, but you just did like a majorly invasive surgery, which you can't return from, where your stomach is literally the size of like 2 inches, and even that couldn't get you to a place all the way, right? Like even with something as drastic as that, you still have to participate and pay attention.
I mean, I'm telling you, I've seen it. Like I've had people come on board 100%. That were like, they've had the surgery, they've lost 100 pounds and gained 100 pounds twice.
Yeah, it's crazy. It's intense. Just goes to show you.
Yeah.
And then what would you say about training? Like would you change your training? I mean, you've been resistance training this whole time.
Yeah. I think training is much more of a constant. I think of training as like protein. It's like you kind of just, that's the anchor.
Yeah.
So whether you're in a fat loss phase, like you don't need to just like all of a sudden start going to like cardio boot camps just because you're in a fat loss phase. Like,
no.
Do your training. Like, what do you like to do? And if you're listening to this show, you're probably like us and you like to lift weights. And maybe, like you don't have to like ramp it up just because you're in a fat loss phase. And when you're building out of a fat loss phase, you just keep the training the same. The progressive overload is relative to your strength levels. And when you're cutting calories in a fat loss phase, you might only be putting on, maybe by the end of a 6-week cycle, you only added 5 or 10 pounds for the whole 6 weeks. And you might have only added a couple of reps to your lifts because you're just in a fat loss. You're in a calorie deficit. Your body's just not as strong.
I can't perform.
But then you circle back to another 6-week progressive overload, but this time it's over the course of a rebuild phase, and from the beginning to the end of it, you've increased your calories by 400 or 500, and you've added 20 pounds to your lifts, and you've added 2 or 3 reps to every set. You know, and so I think that's always the anchor, and then you manipulate your carbs and fats depending on the goal, the objective. But one thing that I want to leave everybody with is that when I got my dog 8 years ago, I put him in training because he was getting aggressive.
I got my dog 8 years ago.
Old red.
Old red.
And I brought him to a trainer, and anybody who has dogs, who's had a dog trainer, knows that the first thing the trainer says to you is that I'm not here to train the dog, I'm here to train you.
Yeah, that's right.
Because it's the owners that fuck it all up. But, you know, one thing he said to me is like kind of getting back to like there's no going back, is that the job is never done. Like just because we've got him to behave himself right now doesn't mean that like, okay, wipe your hands clean, the job's
not
done.
gonna pay attention anymore.
He's fixed. It's like, no, those aggression tendencies are still there. They're not ever going to not be there. We just got to manage them indefinitely. And we manage them by seeing around corners, giving other dogs a wide berth, kind of like being more aware and observant. And we can extrapolate that right down to our lives too. The job is never done. Just because you've managed to control your aggressive behavior towards food for a couple of months doesn't mean that if you stop paying attention that you're fixed forever.
You're not still a little nippy.
That little gremlin's still in there. And he said to me, you know, one thing that I'll never forget is any animal, dogs, humans, whatever, any animal without structure reverts to their instincts, right? And what are our instincts telling us? Eat, sleep
someplace
right?
warm.
So if we don't have an alarm, we don't pay attention to our food, guess what? We're sinking down to the lowest common denominator of humankind.
Right.
And so
reptilian brainstem.
Yeah, exactly, all the way down to that reptilian brainstem of ours. So just keep that in mind. Like the job is never done. It's always effort. You have to pay attention. I'm years and years into this, and I will still overestimate or underestimate how many calories I've eaten still if I don't track my food. I'll be like, oh shit, I'm 400 over. Well, there is my deficit for the day, so now I'm gonna surplus shit. And I'm a coach, and I still do that shit. So if I'm doing it, I know you are.
He knows.
Anyway, so there you guys go. What was that, 63?
63.
That's cool. That's a lot of episodes. That's many hours.
Yeah.
We'll check you all next time. Peace out.
Peace.